Mike Reynolds only wanted to give a little girl her dream, but his act of kindness would inspire a nation. 7 black SUVs rolled into town for a mechanic's secret project, and what happened next changed lives forever. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The small town of Millfield had never seen anything like it. On an ordinary Tuesday morning in May, 7 black SUVs with tinted windows lined Cedar Street, their polished exteriors gleaming in the early morning light. Neighbors peered through curtains, wondering what could possibly warrant such an impressive convoy in their quiet community. The vehicles had come to a stop outside the modest home of Mike Reynolds, a local mechanic known for his exceptional skill with engines and his even bigger heart. For the past 6 months, Mike had been working on a project that had consumed his every waking hour outside of his regular job at Reynolds Auto Repair. In his garage, hidden under a large tarp, sat a meticulously crafted mini airplane. Not just any plane, but one specifically designed to accommodate a child who couldn't walk. It featured special controls, a customized seat, and safety measures that went far beyond standard requirements. Mike had poured his soul into every weld, every bolt, and every wire. The story had begun 8 months earlier when 10-year-old Emma Wilson had visited Mike's shop with her mother, Sarah. Emma had been paralyzed from the waist down after a car accident 2 years prior. Despite her condition, Emma maintained an infectious enthusiasm for life and a particular fascination with aviation. "Mr. Reynolds," she had asked while her mother's car was being serviced, "do you think someone like me could ever fly a plane?" Mike, wiping his hands on a rag, had looked into Emma's hopeful eyes and made a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. "Darling, anyone can fly with the right equipment, and I happen to be pretty good with equipment." The next 6 months transformed Mike's life. By day, he fixed cars at his shop. By night, he researched accessible aircraft designs, consulted with aviation experts, and slowly built something extraordinary. He spent thousands of dollars of his own savings, worked through weekends, and even sold his beloved classic Ford to fund the project. Word spread through Millfield about Mike's endeavor. Soon, locals began stopping by with contributions. An aircraft mechanic offered technical advice, the high school shop teacher provided specialized tools, and a retired engineer volunteered to help with calculations. Even the diner started sending over free meals to keep Mike fueled during his late-night building sessions. Sarah Wilson initially protested the expense and effort, but Mike was adamant. "Everyone needs something to dream about," he told her. "Emma dreams of flying. I'm just building the vehicle." The airplane itself was a marvel of ingenuity, small enough to be legally classified as an ultralight aircraft, but sturdy enough to ensure Emma's safety. It featured hand controls adapted for her limited mobility and an easy transfer system from her wheelchair. Mike had painted it bright yellow with blue accents, Emma's favorite colors. As the project neared completion, Mike faced countless setbacks. Parts didn't fit, regulations posed challenges, and there were moments he questioned whether he could fulfill his promise. But the thought of Emma's face kept him going. What Mike didn't know was that Emma's story had traveled far beyond Millfield. A local newspaper article about the mechanic building a plane for a paralyzed girl caught the attention of a producer at National Morning America, the country's most-watched morning show. The producer, Jessica Chen, recognized the potential of this heartwarming story and took it to her executive team. The network decided not only to feature the story, but to turn it into a special surprise segment for their Everyday Heroes series. They contacted Sarah Wilson, who eagerly agreed to participate without Mike's knowledge. Together, they planned for the reveal to happen during Emma's first flight experience. On the morning of the big day, Mike arrived at his garage at dawn to make final preparations. He had arranged for a small gathering at the local airfield, just Emma, her mother, and a few friends to witness the momentous occasion. He had no idea what was coming, as the sun's first rays stretched across the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Mike heard vehicles approaching. Looking out his garage window, he was stunned to see a procession of 7 black SUVs parking along his street. His first thought was that something must be terribly wrong. Mike stepped cautiously onto his porch as doors began opening. From the lead vehicle emerged Tasha Williams, the famous host of National Morning America, followed by camera crews, production assistants, and technicians. The remaining SUVs contained executives from the Make-A-Wish Foundation, representatives from the Federal Aviation Administration, and, most surprisingly, 3 renowned pilots from the Air Force Thunderbirds demonstration team. "Mike Reynolds?" Tasha approached with a warm smile, microphone in hand. "I'm Tasha Williams from National Morning America. We've heard about what you've created for young Emma Wilson, and we'd like to help make this day even more special." Mike stood speechless, still holding his coffee mug, as Tasha explained their plan. The show wanted to broadcast Emma's first flight live to millions of viewers across America. The Make-A-Wish Foundation representatives revealed they were establishing a scholarship fund for Emma's future education, and the Thunderbirds pilots offered to give Emma a proper escort in the sky, flying alongside her mini-plane at a safe distance. "This isn't necessary," Mike finally managed, overwhelmed by the attention. "I just wanted to help her fly." "That's exactly why we're here," Tasha replied. "Some acts of kindness deserve to be celebrated." 2 hours later, the small municipal airfield had transformed into something resembling a movie set. Lights, cameras, and a crowd of spectators gathered around the runway where Mike's yellow and blue creation sat gleaming in the morning sun. The production team had set up a special ramp and transfer system to help Emma easily access the aircraft. When Emma arrived with her mother, her eyes widened at the sight of the cameras and crowd. But when she spotted the airplane, her airplane, tears filled her eyes. "You really did it," she whispered to Mike as he helped her toward the plane. "You made a plane I can fly." "We're going to take it nice and easy," Mike assured her, explaining the controls once more. "I'll be right beside you in the co-pilot seat. Remember everything we practiced in the simulator." The FAA had granted special permission for this flight, with strict safety protocols in place. Mike had obtained his pilot's license during the building process, specifically to accompany Emma on this journey. As cameras rolled and the crowd fell silent, Mike helped Emma into the pilot's seat. Her mother watched with hands clasped over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The Thunderbirds pilots stood at attention nearby, having promised to follow in their jets at a safe distance once Emma was airborne. Emma looked at the controls before her, designed perfectly for her capabilities. She took a deep breath and began the pre-flight check Mike had taught her. Her hands moved confidently over the instruments. "Ready?" Mike asked. Emma nodded, a look of pure determination on her face. The mini-airplane's engine hummed to life, its sound representing months of Mike's meticulous work. The propeller spun into a blur as Emma and Mike taxied down the runway, the crowd cheering them on. Emma's face showed intense concentration as she followed every step they had practiced. When the moment came, Emma pushed the throttle forward with steady hands. The plane gathered speed, rolling faster and faster until, with a gentle pull on the control stick, the wheels lifted from the ground. They were flying. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by applause and cheers. Sarah Wilson sobbed openly as she watched her daughter soar into the sky. Tasha Williams, normally composed on camera, wiped away tears as she narrated the scene for millions of viewers. As promised, 3 Thunderbird jets appeared in formation, keeping a safe distance. As they escorted the small yellow plane, the pilots dipped their wings in salute to the young aviator. Inside the cockpit, Emma's face transformed with pure joy. For the first time since her accident, she wasn't defined by what she couldn't do. Up here, with the controls in her hands, and the earth falling away below, She was simply a pilot, free and powerful. "How does it feel?" Mike asked, though he could clearly see the answer on her face. "Like I'm where I belong," Emma replied, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. The 27 minutes that Emma Wilson spent in the air above Millfield redefined not just her life, but rippled outward to touch countless others across the nation. As the yellow and blue mini airplane gently touched down on the runway, the applause was deafening. Camera crews captured the moment when Mike helped Emma transition back to her wheelchair, but what the cameras couldn't fully capture was the transformation in her eyes. There was a new light there, a confidence that hadn't existed before. She had conquered gravity, the same force that had, in many ways, defined her limitations since the accident. Now Emma understood that limitations were merely problems waiting for solutions, not impassable barriers. In the days following the flight, the National Morning America segment aired to record viewership. The production team had masterfully edited the footage, interspersing the flight with interviews from local community members who had contributed to the project. Emotional commentary from Sarah Wilson about her daughter's journey since the accident, and technical explanations from Mike about how he had adapted standard aviation controls for Emma's capabilities. The segment concluded with the image that would soon become iconic. Emma's plane soaring through perfect blue skies, flanked by the Thunderbirds in respectful formation. The chyron beneath simply read, "Dreams don't require legs." Within hours of the broadcast, the network's switchboard was overwhelmed. Thousands of viewers called in, many in tears, asking how they could support similar initiatives. The hashtag #LEGT. Emma's wings began trending across social media platforms, with people sharing their own stories of overcoming physical limitations. A tech billionaire from Silicon Valley, whose sister used a wheelchair following a childhood illness, pledged $5 million to establish the Emma Wilson Aviation Foundation. The foundation's mission would be twofold: to fund adaptive flight experiences for children with physical disabilities and to support research into more accessible aviation technology. 3 weeks after the flight, Mike found himself in an unfamiliar position, sitting in a conference room at the Federal Aviation Administration headquarters in Washington, D.C. He had arrived wearing his only suit, purchased hastily from the department store in the neighboring county, still smelling faintly of its plastic packaging. Across the table sat a panel of aviation experts, engineers, and policy specialists who had been moved by Emma's story and recognized the broader implications of Mike's innovative design solutions. "Mr. Reynolds," the FAA chairperson began, "what you've created is more than just a heartwarming story. You've identified gaps in our accessibility approaches that, frankly, we should have addressed years ago." The meeting lasted 6 hours, with Mike walking the officials through every adaptation he had made, every challenge he had overcome, and every safety protocol he had implemented. By the end of the day, the FAA had committed to establishing a new division focused exclusively on developing standards for adaptive aviation controls, with Mike invited to serve as a consulting member. Back in Millfield, Emma's return to school marked another transformation. Previously quiet and sometimes withdrawn, she now moved through the hallways with a new sense of purpose. Her classmates, who had always been kind but often uncertain how to relate to her, now bombarded her with questions about flying. Emma's science teacher, Mrs. Henderson, recognized an opportunity and adjusted the semester's curriculum to focus on principles of flight and physics, with Emma serving as a special classroom consultant. For the first time, Emma's difference had become something that elevated her among her peers rather than separating her. The local impact was equally profound. Millfield had always been a close-knit community, but Mike's project had revealed the extraordinary potential of their collective effort. The town council unanimously voted to repurpose an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town into what would become the Millfield Makers Space, a community workshop where people could collaborate, on projects that benefited others. Mike was asked to oversee the aviation section, while other local experts volunteered to lead divisions focused on adaptive sports equipment, accessibility modifications for homes, and assistive technology. Sarah Wilson, who had initially been hesitant about Mike's ambitious promise to her daughter, found herself alongside Mike at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new space. When Mike first told me he was going to build Emma a plane she could fly, I thought he was well-intentioned, but misguided, she told the gathered crowd. I was afraid he was giving my daughter false hope. What I didn't understand then was that hope is never false when it's backed by dedication and community. Mike didn't just build Emma a plane. He showed her that her dreams don't need to be downsized to match her physical condition. As autumn approached, Mike received calls from 3 major aircraft manufacturers, all interested in his designs. 2 offered lucrative consulting contracts that would require relocation to their corporate headquarters. The third, a smaller company, specializing in light sport aircraft, proposed a partnership to develop a line of adaptive planes based on his prototype. After careful consideration, Mike declined the first 2 offers, but negotiated a part-time consulting arrangement with the smaller company that would allow him to remain in Millfield and continue operating his auto repair shop. "My hands need to stay dirty," he explained to a disappointed executive. "And my community needs me here." That community had changed in subtle but meaningful ways. Mike noticed it in how the town now approached challenges. There was less talk of what couldn't be done and more creative problem-solving. When flooding damaged the elementary school's playground, making it inaccessible to several students with mobility issues, the town didn't simply rebuild it to previous specifications. Instead, they enlisted the help of an adaptive recreation specialist and created a universally accessible play space that became a model for other schools in the region. The Emma Wilson Aviation Foundation grew more rapidly than anyone anticipated. By the 6-month mark, they had received enough funding to commission the construction of 3 more adaptive aircraft based on Mike's design. Requests came in from across the country. Parents of children with cerebral palsy, spina bifida, and various forms of paralysis reached out, sharing their children's aviation dreams. Mike found himself spending weekends traveling to meet these families, measuring children for custom controls, and working with local mechanics in their communities to adapt his designs to each child's specific needs. Emma, meanwhile, had become something of a celebrity in aviation circles. She received invitations to speak at flying clubs and schools, sharing her experience and advocating for greater inclusivity in aviation. At first painfully shy about public speaking, she gradually found her voice, especially when talking to other children with disabilities. "The sky doesn't care if your legs work," became her signature line, delivered with the confidence of someone who knew its truth firsthand. On a crisp October evening, as Mike closed up his auto shop, he found Emma waiting for him in her wheelchair, a thick binder balanced on her lap. "I need your help," she announced without preamble. "I'm starting to study for my private pilot written exam." Mike raised his eyebrows. "You're 12, Emma. You can't get your license until you're 17. Emma fixed him with a determined look that had become familiar. "That gives me 5 years to know everything backward and forward. I want to be more than ready. I want to be the best prepared pilot candidate they've ever seen." Mike's face broke into a proud smile. "Well then, I guess we better get started." They settled into what would become a twice-weekly routine. Tuesday and Thursday evenings spent at Mike's kitchen table, poring over aviation textbooks, weather charts, and navigation exercises. Emma absorbed the material with remarkable speed, her passion for flight translating into an almost photographic memory for aviation concepts. By December, the story reached Hollywood. 3 production companies approached Sarah with offers to turn Emma and Mike's story into a feature film. After family discussions and consultations with lawyers provided pro bono by a Millfield native who had become a successful entertainment attorney in Los Angeles, they agreed to a deal with non-negotiable conditions. The film would emphasize the community aspect of the achievement. Portions of the proceeds would go to the foundation, and both Mike and Emma would have consulting roles to ensure technical accuracy. The most meaningful developments, however, happened quietly, away from media attention. Mike began receiving letters, dozens, then hundreds of them, from people across the country and eventually around the world. Some came from mechanics and engineers inspired to use their skills for similar causes. Others came from parents of children with disabilities who had found renewed hope in Emma's story. But the ones that affected Mike most deeply came from children themselves, their uneven handwriting and simple language conveying profound gratitude for showing them possibilities they hadn't imagined. One such letter arrived on a snowy January morning. It contained a carefully drawn picture of a yellow airplane soaring through blue crayon clouds. At the bottom, in careful block letters, a 7-year-old boy from Minnesota had written, "Dear Mr. Mike, I can't walk either, but now I think maybe I can fly. Thank you for showing me." Mike pinned it to the wall of his workshop, where it served as a daily reminder of why the grease under his fingernails and the late nights hunched over aircraft designs mattered. The legacy of that single flight continued to unfold in unexpected ways. The high school instituted an adaptive engineering challenge as part of its science curriculum, with students tasked to design solutions for real accessibility problems in their community. The local community college added a specialized course in adaptive technologies to its engineering program, with Mike serving as a guest lecturer. 3 graduates of that course went on to form a startup focused on developing adaptive recreational equipment, eventually securing patent rights for a new type of hand control system inspired by Mike's original design. 1 year after Emma's flight, Millfield hosted the first Wings for All air show, a unique aviation event featuring pilots with various physical disabilities demonstrating adaptive aircraft. Over 5,000 people attended from across the country, and the event concluded with Emma taking her second flight, this time performing a series of basic maneuvers that showcased her growing piloting skills. The Thunderbirds returned as special guests, putting on a dedicated performance in honor of what their commander called the most important aviation advancement in a generation, not in technology, but in spirit. On the anniversary evening, Mike sat alone on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in the same colors that had greeted those 7 black SUVs a year earlier. His phone rang. It was Sarah Wilson. "Emma wants to know if you'll help her study for the written pilot's exam," Sarah said. "She's determined to get her official license when she's old enough. And there's something else. The foundation received an anonymous donation today, enough to build 10 more adaptive planes. The donor left only a note that said, 'For the next Emma Wilson out there.'" Mike smiled, thinking about how a simple promise to a child had set in motion ripples that continued to spread. He remembered Emma's face in that moment, when the wheels had first left the ground, the pure joy of liberation, of exceeding what the world had told her was possible. "Tell her I'll be right over," he said, already reaching for his jacket. "Some dreams are worth building, no matter how long it takes." As he drove through the streets of Millfield toward the Wilson home, Mike passed the community center where tomorrow's adaptive engineering class would meet, the workshop where the next accessible plane was already taking shape, and the newly renovated park with wheelchair-accessible swings. Each represented a fragment of the legacy born from metal and determination, from a mechanic's promise and a girl who refused to believe the sky was beyond her reach. The greatest legacy, however, wasn't in buildings or programs or even in aircraft designs. It was in the subtle shift in perspective that had occurred, in Emma, in Mike, in Millfield, and in the thousands of people who had witnessed a yellow plane lift into the morning sky. It was the understanding that limitations are rarely as fixed as they appear, that community makes possible what individuals cannot achieve alone, and that sometimes the most important engineering happens not in the machines we build, but in the boundaries we decide to question.